Classic WoW has taught us all many lessons during its lifespan. At least one thing we learned is that the endgame content for an MMO made 16 years ago is no longer even remotely as difficult now as it was then. With the looming possibility of classic TBC, this presents a pretty large question. Should Blizzard release content pre or post nerf? Hello and welcome, I am Zabraxi. I've actually already done a few videos on this topic of the Burning Crusade release, but I want to focus our gaze a little bit more specifically today towards the raid difficulty and the dungeon difficulty, or the possible lack thereof. Let's go! Content balance in the Burning Crusade was a rather strange experience. TBC is renowned as one of the most difficult times in World of Warcraft, and yet it still has some of the most nerfs to dungeons and raids that I can remember across any expansion. While many of these nerfs were widely accepted during the days that all of this was current content, today players are a bit more divided. I think before we start presenting each side's argument, let's take a quick look back on some of the nerfs and changes that found their way into the Burning Crusade endgame PvE. By the time 2.1 finally landed, so many changes occurred that had an effect on raiding and endgame dungeons. Reading through patch notes from 2.0 to 2.1 is an eye-opening reminder of just how insanely messed up so much of the content of TBC was at launch. Let's not forget that most of the Kaichan gear was actually worse than much of the heroic dungeon drops. Thankfully, this was eventually resolved when Blizzard went through and buffed the majority of level 70 epics across the board. Many players don't seem to actually want this change though, and would prefer to have the heroic dungeon loot be on par, if not stronger than Kaichan loot. Imagine that happening today, where your 5-man dungeon gear was arguably better than your raid gear. Oh, actually, yeah, that kind of did happen in Legion and BFA with Mythic Plus, didn't it? Whoops. You see, there were so many nerfs that happened during the Burning Crusade that I would tend to call soft nerfs. See, if the Nightbane encounter gets like a 20% health reduction, that's a clear nerf, no argue about it. But the Burning Crusade changes, however, were smaller. It was a ton of little things that, when compounded on each other over and over again, would eventually create significant changes in difficulty. And that's what we have to worry about in Classic TBC, because those changes they're just not talked about as much as they should be. Quick question, do any of you that happened to play during the Burning Crusade launch actually remember that the final boss in a heroic dungeon wouldn't drop an epic? Yeah, I legit didn't remember that at all. In patch 2.1, all final heroic bosses would now drop an epic item in addition to a regular blue drop. When you combine that with the fact that in that same patch, all of the level 70 epics were buffed, well, now you have a double buff on your hands. Oh, but at least the haste values were nerfed in 2.1, right? Yeah, haste rating was considered too powerful, so it was nerfed quite a bit. However, haste would now also apply to channeled spells as a consolation. And then in 2.2, they just reverted that nerf, but left the channeling effect. So this raises the question now, which of these 3 possible states is considered best for the game? Do we go with the original pre-2.1 values, like many are asking for the game to launch in? This would make haste incredibly powerful for melee especially, which may not actually be a bad thing considering how much melee struggle in TBC. Do we take the nerf state of haste, which would increase difficulty to the game, but would then punish melee, with the only consolation being that channeled spells are buffed to Stouffer ranged, making the ranged even more powerful? Or do we take both, which was in patch 2.2? This is one of those things where having the post 2.1 values might actually be better for the difficulty overall. Or do we go with a combination of those two? Do we have the pre 2.1 melee haste rating in order to make melee better, but the post 2.1 haste change to make ranged benefit from it less, making melee possibly more value in the Burning Crusade as a whole? I've seen so much of the Burning Crusade community scream that everything should be in its pre 2.1 state, no question. But clearly there's a much more complication than that, as we just looked at with the haste values. Let's take consumables, for example. How in the world does allowing players the ability to stack every possible buff imaginable actually increase a raid's difficulty? It doesn't, of course. Yet, I think I'd be rather hard-pressed to find too many players out there who would prefer that launch method of world buffs and consumables in TBC. This is why I disagree with the notion that we can't just simply ask for Blizzard to go pre-nerf, or post-nerf content. We can't just say that we want TBC to be released as it was pre-such and such patch. The community must be specific in its request to Blizzard. We now have the hindsight of having experienced the Burning Crusade and now Classic WoW. We know how certain things will work out, but again, we must be particular. Allow me to use myself and one of my own requests regarding how I would like to see heroic dungeons handled in Classic TBC. I would prefer the heroic key to require revered reputation as it was pre-patch 2.3. I think it's fine to have heroic bosses, their final boss guarantee an epic drop at the end as it was in 2.1. Yet, I would prefer the heroic dungeons to be in their original 2.0 launch state in terms of difficulty. I'm being picky on what I want here because this is the level of detail and finesse that Blizzard is really going to need in order for Classic TBC to be as good as we all want. I'm not looking for bugged bosses or technical issues that were fixed to be kept in the game. However, let's not underestimate the insane amount of nerfs that came to every single heroic dungeon in patch 2.1. It's incredible just how much changed in terms of difficulty in this one patch. This might be the largest sweeping PvE balance change in an individual patch outside of a pre-patch. Some of the changes I think should happen are also kind of contradictory to the same patch in which they were addressed. For example, I think it's good that patch 2.1 fixed the door tricks where you could easily cheese the encounters of Netherspite and Prince Malchezaar and Kaichan. Those fights were genuinely an absolute joke, even with horrible gear, if you abused these door tricks. Patch 2.1 fixed those, and I'm in support of those fixes staying. However, 2.1 also nerfed the Shade of Iran encounter by removing an entire mechanic where he would Dragon's Breath the raid. Bring that back. Let us deal with his Dragon Breath shenanigans. That could be fun. So should Blizzard launch Classic TBC pre or post nerf? Well, clearly it's complicated. Gameplay and design intentions were resolved in the post-nerf era, such as exploits, buff stacking, etc. I encourage Blizzard to keep those changes final while Classic TBC launches. However, any direct content balance should be kept in its most difficult state, at least at launch. One of the largest regrets that the player base has had is that we are never given the full opportunity to attempt that pre-nerf Cthulhu in Classic. Give us the option to attempt that pre-nerf Kael'thas. Not the bugged, literally unkillable one, but the original one that no one could kill because it was too dang hard. Yeah, that is my favorite fight still in the entirety of World of Warcraft, and if I can revisit the Kael'thas encounter in its original intended difficulty, it would be a dream for myself and many others. Should Blizzard release the items from Heroics being better than much of the Karazhan gear? Even though I said the opposite earlier, yeah, sure. Why not? Let's try it out. Something we've learned from Classic again is that the ability to get some BIS gear from dungeons alongside the first tier or so of an expansion is pretty fine, and it allows for the dungeon player base to remain healthy and active. If it becomes a problem, next phase just revert it and emulate patch 2.1 in that manner anyway. It would be an authentic experience as well as an experiment that has the ability to stay if successful, but also provides Blizzard with a way out if it fails. I would encourage Blizzard to be way more daring with Classic TBC than they were with Classic Vanilla. Despite some disagreements here and there, overall the Classic team has proven themselves reliable in the overwhelming majority of cases. Let's be a bit more nuanced and flexible with Classic TBC than we were Vanilla, and see if we can't make arguably the best expansion ever even greater. Thank you all so much for watching another one of my videos. I really appreciated it. If you liked it, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe for more content coming up. There's going to be loads more Classic and Classic TBC content on the way. I am actually going to be dabbling a bit more into retail a bit. I've spent a little over 100 hours in the Shadowlands beta, and for the first time in a very long time, it's been good. So I kind of want to make some content on that. Don't worry if you were here for most of the Classic stuff. I'm not planning on stopping that anytime soon. So there's gonna be a lot of it. If you thought the video was crap and you made it to this point, please hit that dislike button and leave a comment telling me how bad I suck. I appreciate that feedback. It means a lot to me. And some people, they tell me I suck in very creative ways, which just make me laugh. So I appreciate that as well. But seriously, you all are the best. And if you think that I'm wrong, or you think that I should elaborate further on other details, or you think there's something that I just missed entirely, please leave a comment down below and explain to me what you think Blizzard should do about this this release schedule. The thing that I would like to do, we know Blizzard prefers written compilations of feedback, so I would like to start in my classic TBC videos, kind of compiling different thoughts between myself and the people who watch, and I would like to send that to Blizzard and see what happens and see if they can take that feedback in this written form, which they prefer. I'll do the work in the compilation, but any other viewpoints I think would be really helpful for myself and for Blizzard. So thank you again. Thank you so much for watching. Happy gaming, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!